next plenary, and it's on funding democracy initiatives in Africa. This is one conversation that I know will resonate with all of us here. And to moderate this panel is none other than the Executive Director, Madiba Foundation. Ladies and gentlemen, let's put our hands together for Frederick Adetiba as it comes up. This is the very last bus stop for today, so I need that energy. Thank you. Thank you very much. Now, on the panel, we have online Dr. Jude Mutah, who's the Program Officer, Africa, National Endowment for Democracy. You're welcome, Dr. Mutah. And joining us in person is the Deputy Director, MacArthur Foundation, Dr. Amina Salihu. Let's put our hands together for Dr. Salihu, please. Please do me a favor, let's keep clapping. Men and women supporting women. You're welcome. And last but not least on this panel, we have the Regional Director, West Africa, Ford Foundation, Dr. ChiChi Aniagolu-Okoye. Let's put our hands together for her. So for the next 40 minutes, that is 35 plus 5 minutes, we're going to have this conversation. And Frederick, I wish you the best.
35 plus 5 minutes.
35 plus 5 minutes.
Hello, everyone. This is the very last plenary for the day, and I know, being the very last one, there's a possibility that we're tired. We've had lunch and all of that, but I'm trusting that it's going to be an engaging one. And Akintunde, I would say you gave me the most difficult job here to do, because when now we now have to talk to our funders, it's actually a big deal. It's actually a big deal that we have to talk to our funders. And I want everybody to appreciate them, those that are around. Please put your hands together for our panelists. The reason why this is important is because, on one hand, you rarely can have them come together like this to have conversation around funding. And then the second reason why it's important for us to appreciate them is also because they are supporting the conference and other initiatives of the center. So please, one more time, let's appreciate them. Thank you. Thank you so much. And so the focus of the session is on funding democracy initiatives in Africa. And we'll be looking at the roles of donor organizations like yours, local actors, and then we'll also be looking at issues around transparency and accountability, and how impactful all of those initiatives have been over the years. I have some questions here that Akintunde curated for me, but I have these two important questions, and I would just like the three of you to put these questions somewhere on the side, and hopefully within the time that we have, we'll be able to address them. The first one, these are questions from me. Your funding cycle and direction change from time to time. What criteria or processes does your respective organization use to prioritize and allocate funding? So please just put it on the corner, all right? That's one. The second question that, if we also have time, I would like us to address is, has your support for democracy in Nigeria and on the continent helped to democratize development? How has it helped to democratize development? Because for me, I see democracy as a means to an end. The end is development at the end of the day, all right? So we would like to look into that. And so the first question from my boss, Akintunde. And this is for Dr. Okoye, the Regional Director, West Africa Ford Foundation. The foundation has focused on addressing inequality and promoting social justice. How do these priorities align with funding democracy initiatives in Africa?
Hello.
All right,
Okay.
it's on.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for having me. Really appreciate the opportunity to speak to your august occasion here. So, yeah, the Ford Foundation is a social justice organization. So we are primarily focused on social justice, inequality, democracy, good governance. And the reason we do that is because we believe that that is the foundation and the basis for all development. You cannot have economic development if you don't have good governance. You cannot have social justice if you don't have good governance. So for us, the basis for development is good governance, and that's why we focus on it. The other day, somebody was saying to me when our president was around, he came to Nigeria earlier this year, and somebody was saying in one of the panels, why are you not focusing on economic empowerment? Economic empowerment is a major challenge that we are facing. And if you don't fix that, that affects everything. And I asked him, I said, how many companies left Nigeria this year? And how many companies left last year? So it's not like we didn't have, economic ventures in the country, but the political situation, the governance situation made it such that they had to leave. So you can't address economic challenges if you don't address governance challenges. So for us, that's the core and that's the basis of the work that we do. And we see it as fundamental.
Wow, thank you. That makes a lot of sense. I would like to add this follow-up question. And how has it been over the years? What can you say the impact of your organization has been in that area?
So, the Ford Foundation has been in Nigeria since 1958. So, but officially registered in 1960. So we're just as old as the country. And throughout the history of the Ford Foundation, the idea had been to support the country's development. So it started off by, building the capacity of civil servants, academia, people that you felt, that were going to be the human resource for the, the nascent country that was developing. And from that, then we went to, social issues like education, health, those kinds of things. And then in the 90s, of course, with the clamor for the return to democracy, the Ford Foundation was front and center. The support to Nigeria's, to civil society organizations for the pro-democracy movement in really pushing for the return to democracy. So we did a lot. And when most international organizations left Nigeria, the Ford Foundation stayed. And at the time, people were like, oh, are you staying because, you support the junta? Why aren't you leaving? But the argument was that, we're here for civil society organizations, we're here for governance. So when there is a challenge, this was the darkest years of, civil society engagement in Nigeria. And the foundation felt that the way to show solidarity was not to move to New York and do it, externally, but to be physically present and to really support the pro-democracy movement. And I think that paid off, and that gave Ford in Nigeria the credibility that I think that it continues to have today. And throughout, we have continued to support democracy initiatives. We actually just launched this year, now it's $22 million democracy fund, where we brought together other organizations, other donors to come together to launch this fund. Because as we can see that in West Africa, democracy is backsliding. Yeah. And the challenges are back to, if not worse. At least in 1979, everybody agreed that democracy is what we needed. Mm. Today, we don't have that consensus. There are a lot of people who feel, well, maybe it's democracy, well, maybe the military, well, maybe something else. So it's more difficult. So this fund is actually being put together. It's been supported by the MacArthur Foundation, Carnegie Open Society, and the Ford Foundation. And the idea is to try and breathe life again into democracy, but do it in a way that we've always done it, from a participatory bottom-up approach, really getting citizens to think about democracy in their countries and to reimagine it in a way that allows democracy to thrive and not as something that was imposed from outside.
Well, thank you for that. And I'm glad you spoke about the declining of democracy on the continent. And of course, if we're going to go into that, that will be a full-blown conversation, just looking at whether or not democracy has been able to deliver on the goodies that we expect of it as a system. But again, that is the second question that we have in the bag. Dr. Salihu, your organization recently celebrated about 30 years?
30 years.
30
exactly.
years of operation in Nigeria. And so I want to ask, how has your approach over the years evolved, given the changing political landscape of Nigeria?
Many thanks, my brother. Much like Ford, we have stuck with Nigeria through its darkest days. In fact, the story that summarized our 30th year in this country was described as an organization that has roots in Nigeria. You do not grow roots without being there when you're most needed. You cannot have roots if you do not understand the political economic dynamics of the country you're seeking to serve. And you certainly are not rooted if you're not tackling the problems that matter. And so for the last 30 years, that has basically been the MacArthur Foundation's approach, to ask, what is the most important need that Nigerians have at this point in time? And the needs have always changed depending on the contextual dynamics themselves, depending on the opportunities that emerge. And so our DNA used to be in maternal care and girls' rights and higher education. I can see nods in the audience from people who know our work very well. And then in 2014, we had a change of presidency at the foundation. And a question was asked of the Africa team. If MacArthur was just coming to Nigeria today, what is the thing that would matter most to Nigerians? And we went out to ask dear Nigerians. And we began to learn that, look, there is a policy moment to look at matters that have to do with service delivery, that have to do with accountability, effective use of resources. But whatever sector we might be looking at, unless we paid attention to how these resources reach the bottom of the pyramid, this country isn't going anywhere. Yeah. That is a result of learning from Nigerians over the course of, and to your earlier question, here we are with democracy. But democracy in itself, it's a means, not an end. Yeah. How does it then deliver on the services required where you test the efficacy of democracy? That requires that development comes into the equation. Yeah. And that has led to the work we've done for the last 9 years, 8 to 9 years, around, again, supporting Nigerian-led efforts to reduce corruption. Supporting Nigerian-led effort because we do not think that any development partner can come into this country, or any African country for that matter, and seek to lead the change we seek to see. It's not sustainable. Yeah. The people themselves have to lead that, but you have to co-create the process. You have to co-create the intervention. And that is what we have done for the past 9 years. And every time I enter a room of this nature and I see some of our grantee partners, I'm always very excited because of the forward-thinking work that they do. And I always call our grantee partners the first 11, because whatever field we're funding, and we have worked, of course, media and journalism, criminal justice sector, we're enabling what we call collective action, which is managed by a cohort of civil society organizations that we call Join Body, which, as you know, is pidgin for collective action. And then testing behavior change, because we know that law and order is important, but not enough. You can have all the rules in the world. If you don't understand why people behave the way they behave, you cannot get the change you want going. And so that learning, that co-creation, that consulting has been the way in which we have worked over the past 30 years and also informed the way in which we have segued on from one thinking to the other, but always leading with thought leadership.
Wow. I mean, this is, I mean, there was a session, I think, a couple of weeks ago at the office. I was there, and yes. And the session was really about finding out from young people and youth-led organizations where the pain points are, what the issues are, and all of that. And so what she's saying is actually what the organization does. I'm going to come down to Dr. Mutah of NED. Are you there? Dr. Jude Mutah. Good to see you again. It's been a while.
He needs to unmute.
Can we unmute? We can't hear you. Can we aid him to...
Yes, can you hear me?
Oh, okay. Yes, we can hear you now.
Well, thank you so much for having me and for putting together this a very wonderful conference. It's truly a pleasure to join you, although remotely. I wish I could be there in person. Yeah, but to your questions, I'm sure you are familiar with the net. You know, founded in the early 1980s by the US Congress, but we are private and independent. We're a grant-making organization. And we make about 2,000 grants to our partners that are working to advance democracy in the world. So as far as our structure is concerned, we have what we call our discretionary partners. Those are local groups that are based in country that are working to advance freedoms and democracy. But also we have our sister organizations here in the US that we call our core partners, the NDI, the National Democratic Institute, the International Republican Institute, the Center for International Private Enterprise, and the Solidarity Center, all of which they have a huge presence in Nigeria. You know, yeah, our strategy, you know, for funding. In every country that we work, we have some kind of a guiding strategy. And development of that strategy is informed by really in-depth research, but also really focusing on what the locals in those countries see as priority. So as you may know, we usually don't send out requests for proposals like some other donors would do. Rather, organizations come to us with the ideas and some of the issues they consider as critical for that country. And if it aligns with our strategy, we are happy to explore ways of collaboration. So each country is unique, and we address it that way in our grant making. For example, in Nigeria, civic education and mobilization or protecting the civic space or corruption may be a priority for Nigeria, but in another country, say Liberia, maybe corruption or effective decentralization or service delivery at the local level, maybe what they think is very critical and needs urgent address. So we focus on what the locals, what the citizens see as critical to their country, and then we come into to support. Every now and then we revise this strategy to make sure we are in line with you know, the ever-changing dynamics and needs of this country. But as we always say at NED, our work is easy. You know, we provide the funding, but we see that as easy compared to the civil society organizations and the citizens that are on the ground really taking the risks and investing time to do this work.
All right, thank you. Before you go, Dr. Mutah, this is just still for you very quickly. How do you ensure that funding gets to local organizations in Nigeria while avoiding dependency?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. To tackle this, I would say, I think one of the quickest and most effective ways for donors to support a cause that citizens really care about is to fund local civil society organizations in those countries. You know, local civil society organizations understand the issues, the challenges, and are in a better position to offer sustainable solutions. But again, a big challenge for us has always been how do we identify these credible groups, especially with the advent of the internet, which has kind of helped. But again, we are all aware that the digital space is fraught with unscrupulous fellows with sometimes very malicious intent. So it's therefore very important to start by investigating, you know, what pertinent organizations are doing, who they are collaborating with, and thinking through how we as a funder can come in. So investigating, building relationship and networking opportunities could make a really good connections that might inspire new thinking, but also open spaces for new alliances for common cause. Like the UK writer always said, you know, the best way of giving is given in such a way that the recipient are better positioned, you know, to be able to sustain themselves, to need your gift anymore. And we think about that, we take that very seriously. And this could mean a different thing. Say we are supporting a local organization in Southeast Nigeria, for example. How do you, and a pride for NET is that we are always very interested in supporting new groups, you know, that are just starting. But how do you ensure that these groups are having the technical ability, the set of skills that they need to be able to sustain themselves going forward? You know, how do you ensure that they develop that expertise? And that is very important for us because at the end of the day, we all know that funding, especially donor funding, can dry up at any time. So it's very important for us to support groups to be able to build themselves and be able to sustain themselves when there is the need. So that is why I think partnership and building strong networks are very important. We all donors, internationally or, you know, local. We have also encouraged our grantees to look at diversified sources of funding. You know, there's some groups that, in as much as they're invested in doing this work, relying on donor funding, they've also been considering, they've also considered, you know, some business aspect attached to the organization to be able to raise funds and continue to do their work. Government funding, which is tricky sometimes, is also good. It's predictable and is reliable sometimes, but what is really important with that is ensuring that the relationship is free of bias and no strings are attached. As I mentioned, you know, NED, we're funded by the US government. We get about $350,000 every year. But again, we are independent and non-partisan.
All right, thank you for that. I'm coming back to Dr. Okoye. What would you consider to be biggest challenges in ensuring inclusive democracy funding on the continent, I would say?
Yeah, so for me, there are a lot of challenges. But I think the biggest one is the institutions of government not really responding to the advocacy that civil society does. Because, you know, we kind of model our funding and our advocacy around the way things happen in developed countries. So in developed countries, if there is a problem, all you need to do is to highlight it, show the evidence that this is a problem, take it to the right authorities. If you advocate enough and they see reason in it, then those authorities take on that issue and it takes a life of its own. But in our climb, it doesn't matter, you know, how much advocacy you do and how much evidence you provide. It doesn't necessarily trigger the right organizations, you know, in government to react. So I think that that's the biggest challenge, and that's what's actually frustrating people and threatening democracy. And I'm not just talking about Nigeria, I'm talking about the whole of Africa. Because what's happening is that many institutions and many states are captured. And so when citizens bring their grievances, it's never looked at from the point of view of the grievance. It's looked at from a political lens. And so because of that, there isn't an automatic response to challenges. And that, I think, is what is making the issue, making it really difficult for democracy to strive. But in addition to that, there's no question that, the fact that citizens in many African countries are not as educated as they should be. A democracy really requires an educated citizenry, because you need to understand what the issues are, you need to be able to engage, you need to be able to hold citizens accountable. And so if you are working in a system where almost, 60% of the population are illiterate, and even the literate ones are not that educated, it's very difficult to keep people engaged. And that's why we end up with a politics of religion and politics of ethnicity and those kinds of things, because you're not able to capture and hold people's imaginations with the issues because they don't understand the issues and they can't relate to it. I think for me, another issue is also the fact that we don't have strong political parties, because if you have a strong political party, then it doesn't really matter who the individual is that is ruling. The party will have a manifesto, will have systems in place, will be able to hold itself accountable, will be able to engage with citizens in a way that, gets citizens excited about democracy. As a matter of fact, the party is the heart of democracy. And that's the challenge that we face, that we don't have strong political parties, which is actually a retrogression for us, because in the 60s, we had strong parties. We had, the NCNC, the Action Group, the people like that. The parties were really strong, and people engaged, And I think that, in addition to that, we have also created a system in which women don't feel that they belong in the democratic process. And so a lot of women are not actively participating, and people can disagree with me, but if you have a society in which more than 50% of the population are not engaged in the political process, I cannot see how that can effectively work. And you can disagree with me, but where women are and where women put their mind to things working, things tend to work. And we have examples, with countries like Botswana, with countries like Rwanda, places like that, have deliberately ensured that women participate in governance. And today we are celebrating those countries, but we're not willing to take actually the examples of what it is that they are doing. And I think for me, finally, the major challenge again is the elections. The fact that elections are yet to become what it is that they need to be. For me, elections next to political parties are the heart of democracy, because that's where the ruled and the rulers come into a partnership. The only reason a politician will do what citizens want is because the citizens will re-elect them at the next election. If you have a system where the citizens are not the godfathers, there will be no reason for the politician to be beholden to the people. And so it doesn't matter what you do. if citizens are not the ones, that hold politicians accountable, politicians are like anybody else. I'm accountable to my boss. I'm not going to be accountable to my sister. Amina. I love her very much, but she doesn't determine my livelihood. So I'm not going to listen to what she says to me above what my boss says. But if Amina is the one who's going to decide whether I get promoted in the Ford Foundation and not my boss, who do you think I'm going to be listening to? It's going to be her. And that's exactly what has happened to our democratic situation. The politicians are beholden to those who are going to make sure that they return to office. And that's why we end up with godfathers who are not citizens. And so until we take back the electoral system, which is really the basis, which is really what determines democracy, I think that that's a major challenge. How do we make our electoral system work in a way that allows the voices and the will of the people, no matter how, dissatisfied we are with that will. People in America are crying, but it was a democratic process. As long as people, the citizens are the ones who determine how elections, the outcome of elections, you will have a strong democratic system because everything, it's a boomerang. The citizens determine, the politician is forced to do what the citizens want. The politician then is forced to, then does things like education, health. They're not going to need the Ford Foundations and the MacArthur Foundations because the monies that we bring is actually a drop in the ocean compared to what the Nigerian government has. So they're not going to need people like us. The government will work. Then the citizens will reward the politician because of what the politician has done, and the cycle and the wheel continues to work. So for me, those are the major challenges. And, we will continue to do our best to see that we get to a country where democracy works. Because the alternative, a lot of people are saying, oh, let's go back to the military, let's do this and what. The alternative is not palatable. The military are not trained to run governments. The first few months might be nice and rosy, but what they know is obey and command. So no matter how good the military government is, after some time, they're going to say to you, obey and command. And you're going to, especially for us who have tasted democracy for as long as we have, it's going to become extremely difficult to just obey, and command. And then we'll realize that it's not as rosy. Then we're going to start asking for democracy back. And we're going to set ourselves 200 years back. So let's do the best that we can to fix what we have and ensure that we do it in a way that makes democracy exactly what it is. And I think that nobody can do that better than the journalists who are here today.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
This is so profound. Thank you for this. And all of the issues that you've raised, from low education to lack of strong political parties to the poor, weak institutions that we have and all of that. I think all of these issues we've raised are areas that I think civil society organizations will have to continue to press into, as well as, journalists in the room. It's very important because these issues are there and we have to resolve them for us to be able to make progress. Thank you for that submission. And back to you, Dr. Salihu.
Is our time up?
Okay, just one. Okay. Oh, I am keeping watch. We have 5 minutes. We have 5 minutes.
Wow.
I am timing myself. We actually have 5 minutes more, right?
We had 35 and 5, so now we have the 5.
We're done with 35, so now we have the 5.
Yes.
All right, thank you.
Go ahead.
All right, so this question is for you, ma'am. What lessons can we draw from the foundation's successes in promoting democracy on the continent?
I would say that it's more in terms of opportunities rather than successes, because if we begin to define what we have done as a success, we run the risk of complacency. And once you do that, you lose your cutting edge, and then you become unmindful of every other thing that needs to be done, because it's always going to be a work in progress. And because our context is so very fluid, and I mean, spot on to my sister ChiChi's analysis of our political economy, but that's always very fluid. It means we always have to be on our toes. So it's always about learning the lessons and asking ourselves, where is the next most important milestone to engage? 3 key lessons I would like to share, therefore. One is that social change, the kind that we seek, is incremental. It's never going to be one fell swoop of a revolution, but it's going to be paying attention to some of those little shifts that matter. And it takes time. So we have to be able to invest in that. That's very important. Second is that it's people that we need to change the system. The systems don't change themselves. It's the people within the systems and the people without the system. So sometimes we forget to pay attention to the nature of the ecosystem, and sometimes people say politics is dirty, and then we leave politics in the hands of those who are absolutely our inferior, and then we're crying foul later. What did we expect? It's what you sow that you reap. Isn't that what it said? Yeah. So paying attention to the inside and also arguing from the outside is also very, very important. And third is the role of the colleagues in this room in terms of investigative journalism. Because at the MacArthur Foundation, right, there's a difference between media for media's sake and investigative journalism. I hope that's for all of you. It's investigative journalism, the ability to look power in the eye and tell it what it doesn't want to hear. The ability to be self-accounting and to work in ways that aggregate opportunities and resources. That is what is going to drive the change that we need. We do no longer have a sense of history. How much more history? Our children don't understand. You remember what happened when University of Lagos was about to be named NKO Abiola? You remember what happened? You can't blame them because there isn't a sense of history. Who does that? There's only one collective that has the training, that has the passion, that has the empathy, that has the commitment, that has the foresight to think transgenerationally, to be able to bring that kind of learning to the fore, and that is investigative journalism. So we continue to learn and to find new voices, new energies in rooms such as this, and we continue to encourage collaboration. This is how we work at the MacArthur Foundation. It's not about attribution, it's about collaboration. So you can't come to us and say, I have achieved X, Y. We're going to ask you, maybe if you had worked with more people, you could have achieved X, Y, Z. So critical mass, thinking across generations, and ensuring that we keep an eye on the gains so that there's no regression, but also protecting ourselves and thinking of ourselves. Yeah. I thank you.
I mean, our time is fast spent, so we'll not be able to take any closing remarks, but please, I want you to just put your hands together once more for my panel. This has been an insightful panel. Thank you so much, Dr. Mutah, online, Dr. Okoye, Dr. Salihu, thank you. So please, one more time, let's appreciate it. Let's appreciate that.